was my soul brother, Billy Vera, on K-Jazz with Cherry. Love that version of that song. Billy's got the goods, man. He's got a book coming out, too. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's going to be good. He's got so much history. He's been in the music business a long time and been in a lot of incredible scenes, and he always rises to the top, whatever scene he's in. Stay with us, because the music continues right after the break with Susie Meisner. And close your eyes here on K-Jazz.
Consider your support of K-Jazz as a subscription, like magazines, newspapers, and cable. By selecting to pay your contribution monthly, you can add K-Jazz to those other services that are worth a little something each month. And what you give to K-Jazz will probably be one of the smallest monthly payments, yet the biggest value. To become a sustainer, go to jazzandblues.org.
Close your eyes, rest your head on my shoulder and sleep. Close your eyes, and I will close mine. Close your eyes, let's pretend that we're both counting sheep. Close your eyes, oh, this is divine. Music play, something dreamy for dancing while we're here romancing. It's love's holiday, and love will be our guide. Close your eyes, when you open them, dear, I'll be near by your side. So won't you close your eyes? Close your eyes, rest your head on my shoulder and sleep. Close your eyes, and I will close mine. Close your eyes, let's pretend that we're both counting sheep. Close your eyes, oh, this is divine. Music play, something dreamy for dancing while we're here romancing. It's love's holiday, and love will be our guide. Close your eyes, when you open them, dear, I'll be near by your side. So close your eyes, close your eyes. So won't you close your
Hello, and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of January 17th, 2017. Commissioner Aguilar, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Everybody please rise.
Thank you.
Ready to begin.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Matchin,
Here.
Commissioner Aguilar,
Present.
Commissioner Thomas,
Here.
Commissioner Campbell,
Here.
Commissioner Klinger,
Here.
all present. Thank you.
Thank you. By motion of the Planning Commission, this is the time to notify the public of any changes to the agenda, rearrange the order of the agenda, and provide an opportunity for any member of the Planning Commission or staff to request an item be removed from the consent calendar for separate action. Do we have any changes?
No, we don't.
Having none, the agenda stands. And now it's time for oral communications. At this time, members of the public may address the Planning Commission regarding any items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the Commission cannot discuss or take action on any items not on the agenda unless authorized by law. Those members of the public wishing to speak are asked to come forward to the microphone and state their name for the record. All speakers will be limited to a period of 5 minutes. Oral communication is now open. Would anybody like to address the Commission? Having none, oral communications is now closed. Okay, we have no minutes on the consent calendar tonight. The minutes for October 17th meeting will be agendized for our next meeting. And now it's time for the election of a new chairperson and vice chair. So with that, nominations are now open for chairperson.
I would like to nominate Deb Matchin for chairperson.
I second.
Are there any other nominations for chair? Okay, having none, I will close nominations. And do we have a motion?
Just vote.
There was a motion.
Oh, that was it. We were supposed to have.
We're good.
Okay. Please vote.
I'll be darned.
Okay. I think we have 5. It's showing funny on these.
Unanimous.
So
Yeah.
it is unanimous. Thank you. Okay. Nominations are now open.
Push the button to get it to go away. There. Okay.
It's hard because I can't see anything. Nominations are now open for vice chair. Do we have any nominations? Actually, I would like to nominate Mike Thomas as vice chair.
I'll second that.
Do we have any other nominations for vice chair? Okay. Please vote. Okay.
Abstain.
You abstain? Okay. We have 1 abstention and 4 yes. The vote carries. Congratulations. Is there anything we do now at this point, now that we're...
Are we supposed to
No.
shuffle chairs or
I think
anything?
so.
We are.
Sit on that side, right?
So the 2 of you will
So we're all
trade
moving?
places.
Well, I think Robert? I think Robert and I can just switch.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Mhm.
That'll work.
Yeah, that's perfect.
I'll take my water if you don't drink it. See, I'm a water engineer, so I don't drink. Bottled water.
Okay, and so here we have our newly reorganized Planning Commission. Okay, now on to business. For our first public hearing, we have conditional use permit 16-1. And does staff have a report?
Yes, Madam Chair, and fellow commissioners, and Happy New Year. Tonight I have item 2, which is at 1011 Sail Beach Boulevard, conditional use permit 16-1, to allow the conversion of an existing vehicle storage use to a personal storage use inside an existing building. The site is located at Sail Beach Boulevard and Adolfo Lopez Drive. It is surrounded by industrial uses. It has a parking lot on the north side, part of Boeing's location to the rear, also another industrial use to the rear, the police station to the south, and the military base across Sail Beach Boulevard. The current zoning is RHD 20, but was previously light manufacturing. The existing use is an RV storage both inside the building and on the exterior. It's proposed to be 119,000 square foot personal storage use on the interior of the building and an RV storage of 34 RVs over here in this portion of the property. The operation will be similar hours. The RV storage currently is Monday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and it will stay that way. And the personal storage will be Monday through Sunday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The RV storage is actually a more intensive use than what we will have here proposed this evening, as the site currently has RV storage almost entirely in the parking lot and throughout the building. And on any given holiday weekend or any other time, you could have numerous vehicles leaving that site at any given time coming out onto Adolfo Lopez. The access of the site will be off of Adolfo Lopez. As you can see on this, these illustrations, that the building sits below grade of Sail Beach Boulevard, and it's a major arterial, so you can't access it there. Adolfo Lopez is the only other street that we have direct access from the site. The existing site is 65,000 square feet, and they will be adding a little over 53,000 square feet. The general plan use map designates the subject property as residential high density. The subject site was previously designated as light industrial prior to the city-initiated zone map amendment and general plan amendment in 2013. The subject site is a non-conforming status, which the municipal code allows to convert to a use that would have been permitted conditionally prior to the zone change. The current municipal code allows for personal storage use with a conditional use permit, and that's why it's here this evening. As you can see, here's the site. Here's where the existing RV parking is. It actually flows over into other parking here, and there's no parking on either side of the building currently. There are dock doors that are currently on the exterior of the building, and just to let you know, there is no additional square footage going to be added to this building. It will all be interior improvements. The applicant is proposing to construct this in 3 phases. The first phase, right here, and then they would go on. The Anticipation for the completion of all three of these phases is sometime in 2019. But they would also like the opportunity to do this in one phase and not do it in three phases, and that would be probably completed in late 2018, early 2019 as a complete project. If they were to do it in phases, there would be portions of the RV storage that would still be open during the remodel, but if they were to do it as one project, it would be, the site would just be shut down and they would do it as one phase. Phase one, if they do it in phases, would be on the south side of the building, and it would be to construct 132 personal units, 64 on the first floor, and then to build a mezzanine or second floor of 68 units right here in this area. The office space and the existing warehousing area will not be touched. They will also be looking at adding 13 parking spaces on the south side of the building during that phase, and doing public right-of-way improvements that I will discuss later. In phase two, they will be adding 99 personal units on the first floor and 99 on the second floor of this, adding this mezzanine right here. No exterior improvements. And on the third phase, it will be at completion, and they will add 141 to the first floor, 144 to the second floor, which is 285, for a total of 615 personal storage units. And they will also construct an additional 20 parking spaces on the north side of the building. The site is required to have 76 parking spaces. On completion, they'll have 129 parking spaces. For the improvement plan, this area right here, the applicant has agreed to complete public improvements at the intersection of Seal Beach Boulevard and Adolfo Lopez. That would extend the southbound bike lane from its current terminus north of the southbound right-hand turn only to the intersection. This is to complete the bike lane that is required per the general plan for a Class 2 bike lane and major streets. So currently right now, this bike lane isn't right here, it terminates right here. So in order to keep bicyclists safe and per our plan, it would extend going straight through here. So they would also, and this current right-hand turn lane is right here, they would extend it back. With that no correspondence regarding the project has been received by staff, and that completes my presentation. If you had any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any questions?
I do. Steve, did you say, is this thing on? Okay. Did you make some comments about parking on the north side of the structure? Access from the north side of the structure from Apollo Drive?
There can be no access from Apollo Drive, as this area right in here is a parking lot that belongs to Boeing. So there is a property line that runs right along this area here. There is parking going to be proposed, but it comes off of Adolfo Lopez.
So all access on the north side is owned by somebody else?
The adjacent property, yes.
It has like a parking for farmers and merchants.
Yeah, because
I didn't know that.
I drove over there today, and it would be so easy to just put a roadway through, because quite frankly, you know, you can have a use other than this, and it would have a more intensified land use. We've got the PD there, and first of all, there should be no parking for accurate storage on Adolfo Lopez Drive. But secondly, we've got to keep that roadway clear for the police to get in and out to do what they need to do. Right now, storage is a benign use, but they are permitted to do something of a light manufacturing, which would change the dynamics. And And when I drove by there today, it just seemed so simple to just, connect the dots and put the roadway through. And that would take everything off of, all the demand off of Adelpha Lopez Drive. That's one of the things that concern me. That and the fact that there should be no parking for this facility on Adelpha Lopez, because the PD really doesn't have a parking lot. And so when you go down there, you park right there. That's what your parking is. So those are my concerns.
The parking along Adolfo Lopez is public parking.
It's public parking, I know.
Public parking, and the property right here along Apollo Drive is owned by someone else, so we can't just access this property through that property.
Yeah, I see. So, but I looked at it today and said farmers and merchants, and I went, where? So that was very surprising, because when I went down there, it just seemed so easy to put a driveway, just cut it right through, knock a hole in the fence and go right in that way, and that would take all the pressure off of Adelpha Lopez Drive, because I said, I'm looking down the road. If somebody comes in, buys the property, let's say, and wants to intensify the land use, I don't want anything in there inhibiting the ability of our police to get in and out to go do what they have to do. That's my concern.
Are there any other concerns?
Yeah, if I could ask a couple questions. One is, you say they want to turn this from a three-phase project into a one-phase project. Why is it a three-phase project in the first place? I mean, the city, is that driven by any sort of city requirement?
The applicant requested to have it in 3 phases at the beginning of this application.
Oh, but they don't need our permission to do it in 3 or phase or 3 or 1 or 50 phases, right? I mean,
they don't need our permission to do it in phases, but we do have some improvements that need to be taken care of. So we were looking at what time specific improvements would take place in those phases.
So the condition would be that they do perform the improvements on Sealedge Boulevard before completing the work on the, if they're doing it all at once, I assume.
That's correct. It's part of phase 1, and there is a condition regarding that.
Okay, very good. Now, I do have another question. Is just about parking. This is more of my information. So for this type of use, the required parking is 70. You said 70-something spaces.
For this particular use, it's actually 1 parking space for every 20 units.
Oh, is that typically how it works with self-storage?
That's how it is. That's the requirements the city of Seal Beach has in their
okay,
zoning.
very good. Okay, and so they have 139 or 129 spaces. How many of those are going to have RVs parked in them?
Currently, right now, only 34.
Well, I guess the question I'm just saying it's an RV parking place, right? So are these 70 spots that need to be made available for people who are, meaning they can't use some of those 70 required spots to store RVs. Is that a true statement?
That's correct. They cannot put the RVs in the vehicle parking area.
Okay, very good. Okay, and I think that's all the questions I had.
I do have a question. There's a mention of noise. What exactly are they expecting in the way of noise from this place?
Well, the current use is all vehicles parking, so that would be generate a lot more noise because all of the personal storage units will be within the enclosed building.
Any other questions?
The coming and going, I guess.
Do another question.
No, I don't.
No, I don't have any.
Patty,
Okay, I do have another question. That site was rezoned residential high density in 2013, and it is in the housing element. And I just want to make sure that we don't do anything that prohibits this site from being available for low to moderate housing per the housing element.
The current zoning allows for this type of use with a conditional use permit. If the applicant so wished, he could change this to a residential type project and construct houses.
Okay.
Any other questions? Then with that, I will open the public hearing. Is the applicant here?
Yes, good evening, Madam Chair and Planning Commissioners. My name is Alan Burks. I'm the architect for the project. My address is 100 Ocean Gate in Long Beach. And by the way, congratulations on your election tonight.
Thank you.
I do want to thank staff. They've been very helpful in guiding us through what has eventually become a pretty complex project involving traffic studies and civil engineering studies. And they've guided us through this, and we've gotten to this point. I also want to thank you for considering this conditional use permit, because we intend to provide a product that is desperately needed in Seal Beach and the surrounding community. There's a real lack of personal storage spaces in Seal Beach. And we're also going to improve the street. We're providing a very deep right turn lane onto Adolfo Lopez Road, which will ease congestion at that corner, and we're continuing your bike lane. We're also going to provide new landscaping surrounding the entire building. It will be beautified. We're going to have new security fencing, so the complex will look much, much nicer than it does now. And I'm here if you have any technical questions. The owner of the property, John Kruger, is also here if you have any questions for John.
Thank you. Are there anyone else who would like to speak to this matter? You may be seated. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Burke, can you come back up?
Hi, I'm not sure if you can answer this or if the owner can answer this, but with your current occupancy of RVs and boat storage, I'm assuming boats as well, how many current renters would be displaced with their vehicles, meaning would they have to find other places to go and store those vehicles, or?
That's really a question for John.
I wasn't sure if he should answer or not.
Hi, I'm John Kruger. I've owned the building since 1995, and we actually operated the manufacturing facility there from 1995 to 2010. There's about 450 units total between indoor and outdoor, and about 20% of our units are Seal Beach residents. So about 80% are from somewhere else. And with this transition, it'll probably be heavily populated by Seal Beach residents. We're pretty sure that's what we've been led to believe. Probably almost all the vehicles ultimately will be displaced except for the ones stored outside. So.
Do you have an idea of how many that is exactly?
Well, I think we have spaces for 34.
So 34.
So about
34
400
units.
About 400 units would be displaced.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Your questions?
Well, yes, just continuing with that, what will happen with those 400?
Well, they're all privately owned, and so we have time. We'll give people notice. We may, and we're considering, based on this situation, to procure another building to put all of those in Huntington Beach.
Okay.
So we're looking very hard at that. There's a few sites we've already identified because we'd like to keep those customers in their units, but we really can't do anything about that until we move forward on this. But that would be more than likely what we're going to attempt to do. So that's a plan.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this matter? Having none, public hearing is closed. And
Move to approve.
do we have
I
a second?
Can I make a statement? Can we move for approval with the caveat that all parking for their facility be on their site?
You would like to change the motion?
Basically amend it that all parking be on their site, as
That's a new
opposed to
motion, so
no parking, because that isn't the widest of driveways, and because of the presence of the police station.
that is not my motion.
No.
I'd like to have a new motion that says that.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
That is not my motion.
Well, you guys were quick.
Well, it appears that all the parking is on the facility, as far as I understand, and you're concerned about the public parking?
Public
That's on
parking.
the street that they don't own?
There's a street there, and there is really no public parking for police. Because I drove up and down that street again today. And that is a concern that I have, because I'm looking for down the road, because we're dealing with this now on another project within the city. I'm looking at future use where parking could be a problem. That's my concern. And I want to be sure that we just don't do anything that's going to restrict the city's ability for that site to be watermud housing.
At this time, we have a motion
Madam
to
Chair?
approve.
Madam Chair, may I kind of clarify that
Yes.
maybe?
Yes, please.
Currently, right now, the site does have adequate parking under this proposal. It meets the requirement, plus it has a surplus of 53 parking spaces. And if there was another use that were to come in before we would issue them a business license, it may have to come back before this if it requires a conditional use permit.
Okay.
Or we'd also take a look at it as part of our review for the business license application.
Yeah, I think that's satisfactory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Please vote. All right. It passed unanimously. Congratulations.
Is that noise coming from that?
I think it's the vent on the projector.
Yes, Chair and Commissioners,
Is this new?
So much for improvement.
It's getting hot, apparently.
just as a note, Chair and Commissioners, this started happening this afternoon. It may be related to the heat level, but the Public Works Department is aware of it, and they're looking into it already, so.
Thank you. And can you inform them of the notice to appeal?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking about, do I have to hold this?
We got sidelined.
Is this on? I got sidelined by the noise. Yes, there's a 10-day appeal period from the decision of the commission. The appeal period starts running tomorrow.
Thank you. All right. Up next is Zone Text Amendment 17-1, medical marijuana. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, I'm going to do the staff report. Just a slight correction, it is non-medical marijuana.
Okay.
This is an ordinance. Currently, the city prohibits in Chapter 5 medical marijuana dispensaries and mobile marijuana dispensaries. This is now an ordinance that's for your consideration in response to the voter approval of Proposition 64, which deals with, you could call it recreational marijuana or non-medical marijuana, or we've used the phrase commercial marijuana because that's what's used in the statutes that have been adopted by the voters. So and that was going to be one of my points, when I say commercial marijuana, I'm really talking about anything that isn't medical marijuana. This is an ordinance to, for you to consider recommending approval to the council for Zone Text Amendment 17-1 to amend Chapter 11.4.100, which is currently only dealing with medical marijuana, of Part 4, and amending Table 11.2.05.010 and Table 11.2.10.010 of Part 2 of Title 11 to not make any changes to the medical marijuana prohibitions, but now to prohibit all marijuana cultivation with a limited exception of indoor cultivation, which were basically preempted by Proposition 64, and then to prohibit all commercial, i.e. non-medical marijuana uses in any zoning district or specific plan throughout the city, and make a finding of exemption from environmental review under CEQA guideline 15061B as in boy 3. If you recall, during the November election, the voters approved what is called the Control, Regulate, and Tax Adult Use of Marijuana Act, which for short I'm going to refer to as Proposition 64. And as a result of that approval, it is now legal for persons 21 years of age or older to smoke or ingest marijuana or marijuana products, to possess, process, transport, purchase, obtain, and give away to other persons aged 21 or older up to a certain amount of marijuana or concentrated marijuana, and also to process, plant, cultivate, harvest, dry, or process up to 6 marijuana plants for personal use in or upon the grounds of a private residence. Now, the state, pursuant to Proposition 64, is going to be developing a state licensing scheme for commercial marijuana activity, which will apply to recreational marijuana dispensaries and commercial cultivation sites. And under the proposition, in new Business and Professions Code section 26055E, the state will not issue or approve an application for a state license if the approval of that license would violate a local ordinance. So the reason this is being brought to you is because the city would like you to consider whether you want to ban or regulate, so that, in other words, the state would not issue a license. The Proposition 64 also permits cities to adopt and enforce local ordinances to regulate non-medical marijuana businesses, such as business license requirements, local zoning and land use requirements, requirements related to reducing exposure to secondhand smoke, and also to prohibit the establishment or operation of one or more types of marijuana businesses within the jurisdiction. Now, Proposition 64, as I mentioned, does allow a person to have up to 6 marijuana plants or processed products of those plants in their private residence, but Proposition 64 allows the city to reasonably regulate cultivation and can prohibit outdoor cultivation so long as the California Attorney General does not determine that non-medical use of marijuana is lawful under federal or state law. Now, one thing I do want to point out is marijuana of all kinds, sounds like my dog, remains an illegal substance, controlled substance under federal law. So everything we are doing, just as with medical marijuana, federal law is federal law. It has not changed. But in any event, what we have presented to you is solely the land use restrictions to amend the code to prohibit all commercial marijuana activity, which is very broadly defined and tracks the statutory language in Proposition 64. It also has the exceptions that are required by the new state law, and then the only exception for the prohibitions in these various sections will be the indoor cultivation, not outdoor cultivation, but the indoor cultivation of 6 or fewer live marijuana plants, so long as they're inside a residence or inside an accessory structure located upon the grounds of a private residence that is fully enclosed and secured. The actual regulatory mechanisms for indoor cultivation are going to be presented as an amendment to Chapter 5 of Title 5. That's where the current restrictions on medical marijuana, or I should say the prohibitions on medical marijuana, are also listed, which prohibit issuance of a business license. Some of the regulations will deal not only with what I would say, they're broader than land use per se. They're operational restrictions on what you can and can't do inside a residence when you're cultivating up to those 6 plants. So that's the reason why it's going to be in that part of the code rather than in the zoning code. So with that, if you have any questions, please let me know.
Any questions?
If I could ask, my question is our ordinance or our rules or whatever you want to say that apply to our city, are they as restrictive as you can get as far as prohibiting medical and commercial marijuana use and for commercial and personal uses? Is it as prohibitive as you can get? Is that
Yeah,
as allowed?
a lot of cities have prohibited medical marijuana and medical marijuana dispensaries and mobile, people driving through the city selling the sort of ideas like an ice cream truck. We don't want that. That, of course, was done before this proposition, which basically opens up a lot of personal marijuana usage if you fall within what this proposition would allow. The prohibitions on outdoor cultivation and the types of regulatory operational requirements that we're going to be recommending to the city council are pretty typical of what other cities that want to restrict it or prohibit it are doing.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That's what I thought, but yeah, thank you.
I do. I look at this, and it says here to prohibit all marijuana uses.
To the extent we can under state law, yes, that is correct.
Well, my concern is that statement prohibits medical marijuana
It's already prohibited.
under federal law.
No, it's already prohibited under the municipal code based on the prior initiative that was adopted by the voters. So we're not changing that. But now we are expressly saying not only is medical marijuana prohibited, but any other type of marijuana usage is prohibited except to the extent we are preempted, which is up to 6 plants in your residence.
Okay. People can get cards issued by the state, pick them up at the county to the Environmental Health Agency for medical marijuana. So if they can do that, and you're telling me they can't, I'm not catching what's going on here.
This proposed ordinance is not addressing medical marijuana.
Okay.
This ordinance is addressing if you cannot qualify for an ID card, but you want to grow 6 plants in your house.
Because that's not what it says here. It says prohibit all marijuana uses. That's the misnomer.
We can modify the title if the consensus of the commission is you would like to modify the title. The intent was to say we want to prohibit everything except with a limited exception for indoor cultivation, as we are required under state law to do.
I'm not concerned about cultivation. I'm sure there are others that do have that concern. But there are people who do get prescriptions for medical marijuana, don't smoke it, get the oil, and it can be given twice a day with the prescription of a doctor. And I will be blunt. I have an 11-year-old grandson who's autistic and has seizures. And because of that, my daughter was able to get a medical marijuana card issued by the state. She picked it up through the county. She orders it online from a place in Santa Rosa. She needs a prescription from a very specific doctor. They make it for children who have seizures and who do not respond to any other medication. It is a choice of last resort. It is administered under his tongue twice a day, 9 a.m., 9 p.m., works well. His neurologist has considered him basically stable. Now, in order to get this prescription, you have to prove that you have tried at least 3 other medications that don't work. You have to present medical records that prove seizure activity, such as an EEG. The options they had were surgery, a medical device, or try the medical marijuana. Surgery was risky for him. He is considered a medically fragile child, and he does not respond well to anesthesia. The one and only time they gave him anesthesia, he stopped breathing. My daughter was standing there. That scared the bejeebies out of her. So medical marijuana was the choice, and so far it's working. I don't want to vote for something that's going to prohibit him from being in this city and being able to be administered that. So that's why I asked those questions. And I'm sure there are other parents out there who are dealing with this. We're not talking about some pothead going up to an attic and smoking his heart out. We're talking about there are medical benefits, and I do not want to see that restricted. When I read in this thing where it says prohibit all marijuana uses, that's just that's not right. That's why I have a problem with the way this is worded.
It makes it clear within the text, but that is misleading.
That's what I'm reading it right here. Prohibit all marijuana uses.
Currently, the current prohibition without this, which predates Prop 64, does not allow a medical marijuana dispensary in Seal Beach. It does not allow a mobile delivery tool. However, as was said at the time that ordinance was adopted, the city can't preclude somebody going out of the city and bringing back something. So the intent of this is not to preclude someone who has a medical marijuana card, a legitimate medical need, from using a medical marijuana or a medical marijuana product like the oil. It is intended to address the other aspect of marijuana, which is now opened up by Prop 64. So what I'm hearing you say is you would like this to make clear that we're not intending to preclude someone who themselves or a family member, a child, has a medical need that justifies the use of medical marijuana.
This needs to specifically state that it is exempting medical marijuana use
as allowed under the other provisions of state law.
The way this is written, my daughter could not drive into Seal Beach, the child could not spend the night and give it to him. Not that you guys would, anybody know it, but I'm just saying, well, you never know. God forbid something goofy happens and the police are there. I don't want somebody giving her a hard time. If she is legally allowed to have this for him, then I don't think this ordinance should be written where he would have that would make him what they're doing illegal.
So we have the definition of medical marijuana on page 7 is taken from your existing ordinance on medical marijuana. I think it's been abbreviated a little bit. Do you see that subsection K on page 7?
I'm looking at this, yeah.
So I think what you are asking to have us do, if the commission concurs, is add a provision that makes clear this is not intended to prohibit the possession or use by someone who qualifies for use of medical marijuana.
To deem it as medically necessary, yes.
Okay. And if that's what the commission would like to include in a motion, we can go through and
would you like to make a motion?
Modify it
yes,
to make that
clear.
I
would like to make the motion. What Amy just said, because we cannot preclude his ability to use this. And there are other people out there who have similar needs for what this cannabis, I can't even pronounce it, cannabinoid oil. With the children, they either put it under their tongue or on their feet, under their feet. And my daughter chose the oral administration because she could control that better. And it's quite amazing.
So we have a motion.
So the motion is that we...
Chair Machin, I don't remember if
No,
we've had the
you need-
public hearing.
Oh, we haven't even had the hearing. No. We got carried away. Sorry, Seth. We got carried away. Do we have any other questions of Seth?
I actually do. So I as a layman am not privy to the language for Proposition 64. And you mentioned in your presentation that there were certain portions that would allot some leeway for municipalities or cities to pass laws that would in some ways maybe contradict federal law.
Well, this whole thing contradicts.
Right. I guess my concern is from a litigious aspect is that if there is any sort of dispute, what kind of exposure do we run into when we're going over language? Because you know, we're like a second ago we discussed the language specifically about how this prohibits all marijuana use. So that's something that is broad enough to invite 3 or 4 different interpretations from any sort of litigation.
Well, the existing ordinance that prohibits the dispensaries and the collectives for medical marijuana incorporates the definitions in the state initiative that was adopted by the voters several years ago. So it's consistent with state law. The new definitions in this proposed ordinance track the definitions in Prop 64. What we can't change as a city is the federal government currently still and recently came out and said there's no medically acceptable use for marijuana. Notwithstanding, you know, as you just heard, one viewpoint of that. The cities in California that are trying to deal with this are trying to balance. Federal law says it's illegal, but state law, the citizens have voted, and so to try and reach sort of that happy medium of balancing, yeah, the federal government could come in and say none of this is legitimate, and that does happen where they come in and they want to prosecute, versus we want to make sure that we get in place what we feel as a city we need, because what we may or may not want is the state to issue licenses to let some sort of commercial marijuana business open up on Main Street. I mean, some cities are encouraging it. I think, is it Desert Hot Springs? You may know. There's a couple of cities that are, I think Adelanto is one. They want to encourage it for the tax revenue. Other cities, like this is one on medical marijuana, have said we don't want it. So cities are basically saying we're going to follow what the state initiatives say we can do, and the federal government will do. I'm not downplaying it because it kind of puts law enforcement sometimes in a funny predicament, but we're going to do what we need to do to protect our cities from, if we don't want these uses, we want to make sure the state will not issue any licenses. Because absent, I think, the federal government saying you cannot issue any licenses, the state is proceeding forward to implement these propositions.
Okay, I guess my concern is that by taking a definitive stance on something close to this, that especially following an election that we just had and the interpretation that the layman would have, and that's why I mentioned the layman in Prop 64, do we open ourselves up to exposure for any sort of litigation, whether we prevail or not? But are we going to be looking at people going, look, I want to, you know, I'm a citizen of Seal Beach, I want to do this, I want to do that, and state says I can do this, so I'm just going to go ahead and file a suit. I mean,
well,
is there language that would bind us into a situation where we're protected in 64?
I guess, I'm not sure how, I mean, what you might have is somebody thinking because they're legal under state law, the federal government couldn't come after them. And I think that would depend on how the state decides to implement the licensing provisions. I would assume they will make clear we are not guaranteeing you that the federal government won't come in and say you can't do this, because the state doesn't have authority to do that.
Okay, so you're saying we're essentially protected under federal law currently?
Well, I wouldn't say, I'm not sure, are we protected if the federal government goes after someone? If the federal government goes after someone.
I mean, if somebody comes after us and we take a position, the city of Seal Beach takes a position against somebody who wants to push through and basically citing the new legislation.
Well, but see, the issue you would potentially have, I mean, the state legislation clearly says the state will not issue a license if the local jurisdiction prohibits it. Okay. So if there's a dispute over what is or isn't permissible as a prohibition or a restriction, we can't insulate ourselves, because somebody may sue and say that's a legitimate regulation or that isn't.
But that language is in there.
Well, no, there's no language, because as with any ordinance, the city adopts its best estimate of what the law will allow. And if somebody chooses to say that's not legitimate under, in this case, the initiative, and wants to sue, they will sue, and the city will defend.
So the AUMA provisions, that is what protects us, right? The local control?
What the AUMA or Prop 64 does is it allows certain types of, I'm going to say non-medical marijuana. Some people say, that's why I said some people say recreational marijuana. It allows certain personal uses of recreational marijuana. It does not allow, as an example, you can't walk down the street smoking a joint. You can't say I have the right to come in a business where I work and smoke a joint. It doesn't regulate that. So those remain prohibited. If a city adopts a set of ordinance provisions, the city is doing so with findings that they are consistent with what the state will allow us to do, what the proposition will allow us to do.
Okay.
You can't insulate yourself from possible suit, because, as you know.
So what I was referring to, and I was looking desperately for it, and I think this is it. The AUMA permits cities to adopt and enforce local ordinances to regulate non-medical marijuana businesses, including but not limited to, so that's on businesses, and then it goes on to say that use as well. So that protects us, correct?
Right.
We have the right to regulate.
We will point, what we've done is say, okay, this is what the initiative says. Based on that, we think you can do X. And someone may disagree and say, no, you've gone too far, but that's our best estimate of what a reasonable interpretation of the initiative is.
Okay, and then I had one other, this may sound silly, but my concern for people who do want to use it for medical purposes, but they don't want to buy from an unknown source because they want to control the quality. Okay, so they can have 6 plants. So how is that? So if I have 6 plants, they're growing, they're live, they're not usable, need to be dried and, cultivated and whatever. So I can also have in other stages, I can have plants in other stages drying, or?
No, you can only have 6 live plants and the products from those plants.
And the products from those plants. Yeah. So that's how it's considered. Okay.
Okay. One other thing, on page 7, the bottom of page 7 under K, it lists some of the examples for marijuana, medical marijuana use. Should add seizures to that?
I think spasticity.
Is that what that?
It actually says, or any other serious medical condition.
But getting back to the beginning of the ordinance where it says prohibit all marijuana uses, I think that needs to be qualified to exempt medical marijuana uses. Because, as I said, this isn't something where you just walk in and say, hey, I need, prescription for this.
What we could do.
You have to go through very strict regimen to get the prescription for it.
What we could do, if you actually look at page 4, which has the title, that's where the beginning of the ordinance is. We could modify the title where it says to retain existing prohibitions on medical marijuana, to prohibit all other marijuana uses.
What are the existing prohibitions on medical marijuana?
No dispensaries, no mobile dispensaries.
Oh, okay.
And that, so what I'm thinking is we could modify that title to, add something about with limited exception and retain limited exception for lawful medical marijuana uses. I have to come up with the language, but
Okay, good.
But if that's the general concept of what the commission is getting at, we can add that in.
Can we continue that pending your construction of the wording?
I don't think that's necessary. I think we can when we get to that point, we're not there yet, but after we've had the public hearing and
Oh, okay.
we've come
All
back
right.
to discuss,
Okay.
and the motion is
Because
made,
I want to hear what Amy, what she constructs for the exception, for that wording. I want to hear her wording.
All right. Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll open public hearing.
Good evening, Commission. Seth Eaker, resident Old Town. Congratulations, Chairman, Vice Chair. Welcome, Commissioner Aguilar. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, too, for item 2. I know that the 2 departed, but there's also an agent of my client, John Kruger. It was a 12-month process, and really special thanks to Stephen Fowler for really very diligent work on that with a fairly complex project, and thank you for approving it. On to this item. I would amplify and continue to maintain the position that I have since, I think, 2010, when these issues began. Again, I'm speaking purely as a citizen activist, not a member of any board or agency. But until federal law becomes uniform with state law, I believe that ensuring the maximal restriction effectively is the best course of action. I personally am pro-legalization, but that, to Commissioner Aguilar's issues and also to Patty's issues, I really feel that this does a good job of allowing what the law and the voters said are allowed. And I, too, have family members who, A, use medical products, and B, I have a family member who has the right to grow plants in a different state in their residence. And this seems to do a good job of doing that. And I thought Amy articulated kind of what it's doing correctly, which is really, let's keep what happens inside your home and as a private citizen in this limited enclosure yours, and we're not going to bother you. And I think that makes it small and containable, and any other use that isn't already covered by the medical component should be controlled and regulated. And I think the character and consistency of the town is such that this is appropriate until we have agreement between federal law and state law. And I think I've said that with every case. So I would amplify that, repeat it, and thank you for your consideration on this matter.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this issue? Having none, public hearing is closed. Discussion or motion?
Amy, have anything yet?
I'm looking at the existing language to see how we address it. Mr. Basham and I were just discussing, because when we came before you with the medical marijuana language, actually when we came before City Council, we were concerned about Leisure World, where the medical issues might be of concern. So if,
I guess they come from areas you're not expecting them.
I think wouldn't it be easier just to propose striking that one line that states to prohibit all marijuana uses, and just strike it instead of adding or changing the language?
It's got to either that or it's got to be qualified.
Well, before that, it does address specifically medical marijuana,
Clearly states that in private you
and then it makes a broad statement basically saying prohibits all uses, and then it goes back to saying the cultivation prohibits.
I think he might be right.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
I'm proposing just striking the line that specifies to prohibit all marijuana uses, just those words. If we strike those, it would change the language to coincide with what.
That's the restrictive words right there.
Right.
All
So if
Yeah, we could.
Everything else
I
is
think that's
there.
the whole point of this, isn't it? Is we're talking about commercial or recreational use. Otherwise,
It's
I know, but it doesn't say recreational use. It says
Limited
all use.
exceptions for indoor cultivation in private residences.
Right, but again, I think the message we're sending here, isn't it, that, okay, so we've already said no to medical marijuana, and we're also saying no to other commercial marijuana uses. So we have to say that one way or another.
We could take out that language and then,
Yeah, I think you need it.
the quote, to prohibit all
Line
other
6.
marijuana uses.
I don't know, this commissioner's opinion is that this covers it pretty well, and I think this says exactly what we want to say. It's consistent with what we said in the past, and it has worked in the past, and that is we're saying that we are going to be as restrictive with regards to marijuana cultivation, sale, use, medical, all otherwise, as we're allowed by law.
What if we
And we will continue to do that. So I move to approve this particular ordinance.
I second it.
And I have problems with the verbiage, all marijuana use.
Okay, well then
That's what's gotta be-
you don't need to side
Could,
with the
could,
motion.
instead of all other medical
getting into
marijuana or
dangerous
marijuana
territory.
use, could we say just a moment,
That's what-
instead
that's
of
what it's
all
gotta say.
other,
It's gotta say exempt
excuse me,
It does. No,
instead of all other marijuana uses, could we not say prohibit all, instead of other, commercial marijuana uses? Because then we say, and to prohibit
Yes.
marijuana, why couldn't we do that?
Yes,
That
we
does
could
it.
do that. Yes, I think you're
Right.
right.
Commercial marijuana?
That takes care of it.
Amy, do you think that is an improvement?
Yes. Rather than deleting that phrase, we'll say to prohibit all commercial marijuana
commercial
uses.
and non-medical, the same thing? Yeah. Commercial and non-medical is the same thing? Right. Okay, good.
Well,
I did ask the city attorney.
Recreational?
It is.
So
Yeah, we
commercial-
could change.
So the
well,
same thing. Okay.
I
Now
think
we
the,
have a motion.
may I just
Yes.
add one thing? I think the message you want staff to convey to the city council is, tell me if this is wrong, you want to enable people who have a medical justification to be able to use medical marijuana in their home without fear of violating the ordinance.
Yes.
And as long as we convey that through the ordinance, and we can make the change if the commission votes that way, and then between now and the council meeting, we will go back through and make sure that conveys that, and we can report back with the modified language, so that rather than delaying this, we will move it forward to the council meeting, but we will report back to you, this is what we've done.
So should we wait till we hear from you before we vote on it?
I would suggest no, because of the time concern. The sooner you get something in place, right now there is nothing.
She's happy with.
So, yeah, I'm happy with Commissioner Matchin's suggestion. I just want to go through and make sure
Okay.
we've done what you, as incorporated by the commission, would like to have people be able to do.
Okay. It's just that in the past, we've had better luck when we came back to review things.
Do we have a motion?
Chair Machin.
Motion and we didn't vote
I
on
ju-
it.
Well, the motion was as is written here, but I've heard two things, if
Mayor.
I can summarize.
I was going to say, could someone restate the motion?
That's what I'm going to attempt to do. Because I heard two things that were going to happen. One is that we will modify the title to change the word other to commercial.
Okay, good.
And two is we are going to ask legal to look at the language within the ordinance and be specific that legal use of medical marijuana within people's homes, as which is allowed currently, will continue to be allowed. Something along those lines.
Yes.
And by the way, on the examples they cited, spasticity and seizures are two different things.
And if you want to make that part of the motion, the definition refers to diagnoses as opposed to symptoms, like HIV. But if the commission wants to have us add seizures, we can add seizures.
To do that, because that is something separate. Okay.
Okay, and item 3, out of deference to Commissioner Campbell, we will add seizures to that list. So that is my motion, if that makes sense to everyone here.
Okay. No, that's good.
And on that motion, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Please vote. 5-4. Motion passes.
Who voted no?
5 to 4.
5-0. I thought he said 4 to something.
In favor. 5 in favor.
We don't count the motion.
This is your, well, no, you did a lot, you did a couple of meetings last year. I was going to give you a quiz.
All right. Okay, moving on. Oh, do you have anything to tell us about, well, there's no kind of
Director's report.
just director's report. I was thinking the 10 days, but we don't have any.
No, because it goes to council.
Amy, when you finish doing whatever it is you're going to do, can I have a copy of it?
No. Yes, I think we will bring it
Okay,
back.
because
and
I
report. That was
really,
a joke.
okay, I really at this point preferred that we see what it is we're voting on, not, this is what we think we're voting on, okay? And we voted already, but I'm just saying, I would like to.
So, Madam Chair, just to make sure that this is clear, we'll bring back a copy, but this is moving forward to City Council. Okay.
That's, I know it's moving forward, but I want to know for sure what we.
Director's report, please.
Madam Chair, nothing to add. Welcome aboard, Commissioner Aguilar. We're grateful that you decided to devote and volunteer your services. A lot awaits you in this coming year. There's quite a few items that are forthcoming. So we welcome your knowledge and your expertise. So appreciate it very much.
Any commission concerns?
Don't we have another item? Item 4 in our packet?
Not on mine.
I've got one for 239 15th Street.
I have an item
I don't have an item 4.
I
Is
do.
that left over from?
Maybe it was from a meeting I missed.
All right. Any commission concerns?
None for me.
No.
I also welcome the new commissioner. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm happy to be here.
Very happy to have you.
Okay, I do have some comments. One, I received a complaint from someone here in Old Town regarding a house at 118 7th Street. It was a new house built about a year or so ago, and it has a canopy on top that's been there for over a year, and apparently it says detached canopies are permitted on roof decks provided the canopies are permitted only if they are collapsible and maintained below the height limit when not in use. This thing has been up since day one. I don't know if that's permitted.
I think that's something that you would bring to the planning department.
Okay, well, I
Directly.
figured, we're here tonight, so I figured I'd mention it. And then the only other comment I have is we're going to miss Esther Cummings. She was here a long time. She did a good job.
Yes, we are going to miss
Okay, we're going to miss Esther. So,
We'll
Esther, we
definitely
miss you.
miss Esther.
We miss you, Esther.
And welcome, Robert.
All right. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.